What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's my watch list for Game Week 3. So I'm going to go through some of the players that have either caught my eye and or have good upcoming fixtures. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And make sure to check out Fantasy Football Hub. They're still up to 50% off at the moment. All the links you need to get signed up are in the description below. So despite the 3-1 loss to West Ham, when a £4 million defender lines up for a team like Chelsea, it's difficult to not take notice of that. And that is, of course, Malo Gusto, who played as the right back while Reece James is injured. And he's owned by just 2.4% of all FPL managers. And if you've been following along, and it would have been hard to miss because I've mentioned it in pretty much every single video, Chelsea do have some nice upcoming fixtures, starting with back-to-back home games against Luton and Nottingham Forest. Then it's Bournemouth away, Villa at home, Fulham away, and Burnley away, right up until Game Week 8. So even though they didn't defend well against West Ham, it's hard to see how they don't pick up clean sheets with the fixtures that they have, to the point where if Everton had these same 6 game weeks, I'd even back them for 1 or 2 clean sheets. So I think Chelsea will be fine, and Gusto at 4 million represents really good value, allows you to spend money elsewhere. So there's no real reason not to bring him in, although it is worth noting he is only in the team because Reece James is injured, and once he's fully fit, he'll be back into the starting 11 and Gusto will be moved to the bench. Now, how long that is until he's back, Reece James, we don't know. Pochettino did say before Game Week 2 that he was going to be out for a few weeks. Now, Ten Hag last season said something very similar about Bruno Fernandes, and the FPL community spent a long time discussing how long a few weeks is. I would usually say like 3 to 4 weeks. So that's the kind of time frame where Reece James might make his return. Obviously, he does have a long history of injuries, so it might be that Pochettino integrates him back into the team a little bit slower, just to manage him, especially if Gusto's doing well. But let's just say for now, 3 to 4 weeks. If you look at the fixtures that Chelsea have, the Luton game is on the 25th of August, the Forest game is on the 2nd of September, the Bournemouth away game in Game Week 5 isn't until the 17th of September because of the international break. Now, at the time recording, that is 27 days away, plus the time that Reece James has already missed out. That's just over 4 weeks. So by Game Week 5, maybe Game Week 6, Reece James could potentially be making a return, which would leave Gusto as a very short-term transfer for Luton at home, Forest at home, maybe Bournemouth away, possibly Villa at home as well. And to be honest, with those fixtures and for 4 million, it's maybe not the end of the world. The only reason I would say to be cautious is if you're someone that thinks they might triple up on Chelsea. Now, after their performance against West Ham, you're probably thinking you don't want to do that. But the narrative, if they have a good game against Luton, will quickly switch again. And then you look at the fixtures afterwards, you might suddenly want 1, 2, maybe even 3 Chelsea players like Sanchez in goal, Chilwell. Obviously, Sterling looked really good against West Ham, especially in the first half. If a midfielder of yours gets injured, maybe he'd be worth looking at. Jackson as well. All of a sudden, that's 4 players outside of Gusto that you might want. And obviously, he would block that. And if James comes back, you've then got a Chelsea player on your bench that's not going to play. Now, I know some people will be thinking, I'll just leave him there because if Reece James gets injured again, I can just play him. And I don't think that's the worst tactic, especially if you're kind of against or not looking to go for triple Chelsea. So I think for a lot of people watching this, they're not going to want that triple up, in which case Gusto is fine. But if you think you would, I'd maybe be cautious about bringing him in. And also, once James comes back, if he comes back and the fixtures still look good for Chelsea, you might want to bring him in as well. And Gusto could block that. Now, obviously, he's a defender. So if you wanted to bring James in, you could just swap Gusto for Reece James. But there's a difference of 1.5 million, possibly 1.4 million soon when James goes down in price. And you might not have that money to spend. Whereas if you didn't have Gusto on the bench, you could change one of your other £5 million defenders to James for just 0.4 or 0.5 million. I know I'm talking about scenarios which probably won't matter or won't happen in the next few game weeks, but it is worth thinking about. The other thing is a lot of people have got pretty good defences. So my team for this week is Chilwell, Estepinian against West Ham at home and Saliba against Fulham at home. I don't really need another defender in there. So if I bring Gusto in, I'd have to bench Saliba or Estepinian, and I don't really want to do that. So at that point, I'm putting the Gusto transfer off until Game Week 4. And then obviously you've got one of the good fixtures missed, right? So you've missed Luton at home. You're buying him for Nottingham Forest at home. So you're losing good fixtures, but you're also getting one step closer to when Reece James is back. So for me, Gusto is firmly on the watch list because it's hard to ignore a £4 million defender. But I don't think he has become essential or must-have or anything like that. And also, unless you want Salah, there's not really too many players to enable anyway. There's lots of money to go around. So I like him, especially if you've got a defender that's maybe injured or a rotation threat or something like that. But for my team, I'm not sure where he fits in right now. And I guess because of that, I'm happy to give him another week to see if Pochettino possibly mixes things up. Because Chilwell's played left wing the last 2 games. If he plays left back at any point, it might be that Pochettino shifts the centre-backs over so that Colwill plays left centre-back, Thiago Silva plays right centre-back, and Disasi maybe plays on that right-back position instead. For what it's worth, that could probably be overthinking. I presume that Gusto will continue to start. But for someone like me where the defence looks pretty good, there's no need to rush it. You can just wait until game week 4 and hopefully get an update on how long James is going to be out for. Because if it starts being like 6, 7, 8 game weeks, then I'm much more interested in Gusto. So he looks good. That 2.4% ownership is definitely going to get bigger this week. So speaking of the narrative changing very quickly in FPL, let's talk about Phil Foden. Because last week when I was doing the game week preview and final thoughts, I got a lot of questions about him ahead of Newcastle at home. Is he going to start and is he worth keeping hold of? Flash forward a few days and it's like he's reached near essential status for our FPL teams because of one good performance against Newcastle. And I don't want to downplay it. He was absolutely fantastic in that game, but I'm not sure we really learnt anything new. We already knew Foden was fantastic. It's just about whether or not he gets the minutes. That's always the key question. And some people are now saying, well, De Bruyne is out, so his minutes go up. I fully agree. But guess what? De Bruyne was injured before Newcastle, and it didn't stop people questioning whether or not he was going to start. Why? He's a Man City player, right? And we've seen this many times before. You could say he was so good in that Newcastle game. How can Pep Guardiola drop him? Well, I'll give you the answer. It's Pep Guardiola, and we've seen this loads of times before. So there are still some question marks. But for what it's worth, because it probably sounds like I think he's a bad option, I do think he'll get good starts in the short term. I also thought he was going to start against Newcastle at home. And so if you're looking for a punt or you need to change one of your midfielders, you should probably look at him. Sheffield United away, Fulham at home. There's every chance that he'll start both of those games. My main issue is in the long term, I'm not sure how much money I'd be willing to bet on that. I think right now with Bernardo Silva a doubt, no new signings in the transfer window, things look really good for Foden. But even if they didn't sign anyone, right, and let's say Bernardo Silva's fit, he could play on the right, and of course Foden could play centrally. But if we think about how they line up on paper, I'm not going to go into, in possession tactics, etc. But on paper, Rodri is the 6, and then they got 2 number 8s. Well, Foden and Alvarez could be the 2, but Kovacic is already getting minutes as well. And if Cole Palmer stays and he gets some time on the right, because he's impressed so far during this season, then Bernardo Silva could play central, and then you've got another player that can play in those roles, and that's before they sign anyone. And I'd be really surprised if the transfer window shuts and Man City don't sign a new player. And even if it's a winger that doesn't directly compete with those central spots, that does mean that if that winger plays, Bernardo Silva is free to go and play central, and then suddenly you've got Foden, Kovacic, Bernardo Silva and Alvarez that are all competing for 2 spots. And just because Foden's played well, it does not mean that he will continue to start. So that's my worry. And I know people will say, well, new signings won't necessarily come straight into the side, but we have seen times when that's happened. Jack Grealish, when he signed, played a lot of games straight away. I think if I asked you about Vardiol right now, most of you would probably say he's going to continue to play. He's only just signed. Kovacic has already started a few games as well. So it's not necessarily the case that a new signing comes in and just doesn't start. So I think in the short term, Sheffield United away, Fulham at home, Foden's great. If you get West Ham away and Forest at home, happy days, right? He may well get enough points there where it doesn't matter if he's not a good long-term pick. But I don't think he's now suddenly essential. That's my main overarching point here. He, like lots of players, Alvarez, Diaz, Jota, Nunez, are fantastic if they get minutes. That's always the key question. If you think he's going to start the next 3 to 4 games and you need a new midfielder, he's definitely worth looking at. Again, a bit like the defence, if I look at my team, Fulham at home and Saka at home to Fulham and Martinelli at home to Fulham and Burmo at home to Crystal Palace and then Rashford and Fernandes against Forest at home, it's hard to make a case to take any of them out, and so I don't really need Foden. But if something happens to one of those players, then I may even look at him myself, right? And I know I've said I want to avoid minutes risk, but I think in the short term, he's not that much of a risk. Longer term, he probably still is. So as you know, I already own Brian Mbeumo, but I don't think a double up on their attack with Yohan Wissa is completely out of the question, given how good the Brentford fixtures are. So like Chelsea, they got back-to-back home games. For Brentford, it's Crystal Palace and Bournemouth. Then it's Newcastle away, which is the toughest game of the next 5. Then it's Everton at home, terrible defence. I don't think that's going to improve anytime soon. Then it's Nottingham Forest away in game week 7. So things look pretty good. The thing I'm struggling to get my head around this season is Wissa represents really good value at 6.1 million. But what do I need the money for? My only premium is Haaland. I got no plans to get Salah until game week 9 at the earliest. For what it's worth, if you've got Salah and you're happy with the structure of your squad, you should keep him. But because I don't have him, I don't really have any plans to get him. That might change. I might need money for Trippier or something like that soon. But right now, I don't need to worry about having loads of good value players like Wissa and Gusto. But on the flip side, I should really fairly weigh him up against the other options that I might bring in. So if I take Watkins out, I'd be looking at Jackson or Alvarez or Wissa. And automatically, we go for the most expensive player, right? So Nicholas Jackson would be top of the list. And he probably will be the one that I bring in. But I should really think about Wissa, even if I don't need the money right now. And I think with Brentford, yes, they've lost Tony, but they've looked really good. And you could say, well, that's because they've had 2 really good fixtures, although one was Spurs, to be fair. But that's great. They've got really good fixtures to come as well. And I just think, and I said this pre-season, that Thomas Frank and Brentford, they just know how they want to play. And everyone is fully aware of how that works. And that's why in the first 2 matches, from an attacking sense, they've done really well. And I think that will continue. So for that reason, Wissa might be better than a Jackson, where Chelsea is still in transition, loads of new players, new manager. Maybe that's not going to work out too well. Maybe Jackson wasn't supposed to be the out-and-out number 9, but because they haven't got anyone else, he has to be played. There are concerns about Chelsea. Again, that's probably still where I'll go, but maybe I'm not giving Wissa a fair kind of chance. And obviously with Alvarez, you got the same thing around minutes. Now, one of the reasons that I went for Mbeumo is because of penalties, and one of the reasons I didn't go for Wissa is because I was worried about rotation, and that could still happen. They've got a lot of players that can play in his position, and that's why he's been subbed off early in both the games so far. So he played 71 minutes against Spurs and 78 against Fulham. The transfer window's still open. Brentford may well go and sign another striker. Although, given how Mbeumo and Wissa are playing, they might not feel like they need that now. So there are some concerns around Wissa as well. But I think in terms of how quickly teams have clicked an attack without, you know, key players like Tony for Brentford, for example, and Chelsea with loads of new ones, Brentford are looking better at the moment. So for that reason, I will look at Wissa. And also, I looked on Fantasy Football Hub. Again, if you want to check this out for yourself, links in the description below. So far in the first few fixtures, for non-penalty expected goals, let me just bring the list up here. This is total, not per 90 minutes. Wissa's at 1.42 in 2 matches. No penalties, because obviously Mbeumo takes them. That puts him second, only behind March and Morpay, who we know is a terrible finisher. So in terms of getting chances, he's getting a lot. That's even more than Isak with 1.35, although obviously granted that Isak has had to play Man City. So things look pretty good. Is he going to keep getting that every single game? No. But for 6.1 million, he is a fantastic option, and that money might come in handy later on. I still think, because it was my initial thought, Jackson is still my preferred transfer. But if there's any of you out there looking for a cheaper player at 6.1, I think you can easily bring him in now, hope they don't sign a new striker, hope that he keeps starting, and you don't really have to worry about him until game week 7. Look, I know what you're thinking. I spent the first 2 game weeks talking about how I didn't want any minutes risks in my team, and all of a sudden I've got Phil Foden on the watch list, and now I'm about to talk about Ruben Dias as well. But in the case of Dias, something has changed, and that's the injury to Reece James. Originally, he was the 5.5 million defender that I wanted. He's no longer available, and unless I want to use a Chelsea spot up on Gusto, I've got to look elsewhere, and why not look to target the best defence in the league? And I think minutes-wise, Dias is probably right up there as one of the top options. I know I very rarely talk about Akanji, and he always seems to start, and that could continue. But if I'm betting money on who's going to get the most minutes over the next 4 to 5 game weeks, Ruben Dias is always going to be right up there. So I'm not against going for him. I don't really need him in game week 3 for Sheffield United away, because as I've already discussed, Saliba, Estupiñán and Chilwell have all got really good fixtures. But from game week 4 onwards, I could possibly use him. Like Estupiñán's got Newcastle at home, then it's Man United away in game week 5. Saliba in game week 4 is Man United at home as well. And I know Man United haven't clicked so far and scored many goals, only 1 total in the first 2 games. But they're one of the top teams in terms of expected goals generated. The goals are going to come eventually. So if I could bench Saliba in game week 4 and play Diaz against Fulham at home, that would be something I would consider. So probably not going to come in this week, maybe in game week 4. I wouldn't want to leave it too much longer than that. I think if I want a Man City defender, they have to come in sooner rather than later, because longer term, the fixtures get a bit trickier. So you've got Sheffield United away, Fulham at home, like I've just discussed. Then it's West Ham away, Forest at home, Wolves away. So for the next 5 game weeks up until game week 7, it looks pretty good. But then between game weeks 8 and 14, they play Arsenal away, Brighton at home, Man United away, Chelsea away, Liverpool at home, and Spurs at home. All 6 of those teams could easily score. Well, maybe not easily, but they're all capable of scoring against Man City. The only easy fixture after game week 7 is Bournemouth at home, and that's not until game week 11. So I think for Man City, like I said, it's sooner rather than later. If I get to game week 5 or 6 and I still don't own one, I'll probably just ignore them, because by that point, the Champions League will have started up. John Stones could be back from injury as well. And then suddenly the minutes, even of someone like Diaz, are a little bit more worrying. I guess if you do bring them in and you get to those more difficult fixtures, it's not the end of the world if you have to play them, because they are always difficult to break down. But I think even with Man City, you've got to target the good fixtures. So Diaz firmly on the watch list, not for game week 3. He's someone I'll eye up in game week 4. And I'm hoping to have the money to do that, because I'm probably going to drop Watkins down to Wissa, Alvarez or Jackson, which I'll talk about in the team selection video later this week. So I'm going to leave that one there. Let me know in the comments below who you have added to your watch list for game week 3. And if you've enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Help me hit 375,000 before the international break. And if you're listening on podcasts and have been enjoying the content, please do rate 5 stars on whichever platform you're listening to. Otherwise, I will leave it there. All the links you need for Fantasy Football Hub are in the description below, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.